Hello, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Andre. And in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about the state of the modern guitar player. I'll clarify what I mean by modern guitar player in a minute, but what I basically want to talk about is what has happened to guitar players over the past 10 years, at least in my worldview, in my experience, and give you my thoughts and feelings about it, and also my predictions on where the guitar player uh, as a whole is going. So if that sounds interesting, stick around. I'm gonna do a lot of rambling. This is again one of those videos off the cuff. So that's that. So what do I mean by modern guitar player? The guitar players I'm talking about are really guitar playing that requires some technical skill. So it's really virtuosos I'm talking about, like Eddie Van Halen and Yngwie Malmsteen and such, in terms of more modern players that I will be focusing on in this in my discussion. And I'll be firstly looking at guitar players from the 2000s up until now, and then focusing really on the last 10 years. So from 2016 to now, as of this recording, 2026. So throughout human history, there has been people that have shown incredible musical skills, from Mozart to Paganini, Bach, and so forth, back in the like hundreds of years ago. And of course, if we come up in the 1900s, you have, if you look in terms of guitar, you have guitar players like Charlie Christian, Wes Montgomery, Johnny B. Good is one of those guitar players that again start really influencing people and shaping the guitar and the guitar players that I'm influenced by. But one of the first really, in terms of modern guitar players, that really was like a bolt of lightning is, of course, Jimi Hendrix and the Jimi Hendrix Experience, with his very flamboyant way of playing and his outgoing way of performing, along with his songwriting that really defined and still to this day influences people. Even young players that are coming up and are influenced in some way by Jimi Hendrix and so forth, even like myself. So he's really the one that started the acrobatics of guitar playing, all this wild things you can do on the guitar that he did with his Stratocaster. But the second one comes, of course, a decade later, and that's Eddie Van Halen, with Van Halen, and particularly with the release of the Van Halen 1 record. And everybody knows the guitar solo Eruption that really defines a whole generation of guitar players, because Eddie was really the one who basically defined the decade to come with the release in 1978 of Van Halen 1, and basically everyone copying after that, because then when you come into the beginning of the 80s, you see a slew of guitar players appearing that basically do more, not the same thing, but do a variation of what he started. You have Randy Rhoads, George Lynch, Warren Diamatti, Mick Mars, and you can go on and on. Basically, the 80s in terms of hard rock, again, was really defined by Eddie Van Halen and his playing. The only one that really made an offshoot in terms of his playing is Yngwie Malmsteen, in my opinion, who came, of course, to the US in '82 and released his first album with Steeler and then Alcatraz, that really took what Eddie did and semi-applied the principles of classical music to the guitar in his own way. Of course, by that time, there had been other players like Ritchie Blackmore, Uli John Roth, and Michael Schenker that had already done neoclassical things that as such. But again, Yngwie, like he's always said in his interviews, focused mainly on violin as his basis, meaning Paganini and such, and the way of Yngwie has said very clearly that he wasn't really influenced in terms of his classical playing by Blackmore and such. He took simply all the things that were done on violin instead, again with Paganini, and applied it to guitar and then built on that. And he was again one of those lightning that hit there in the early 80s that really defined and really generated that whole new branch of guitar players. Again, you can see with the 90s, and particularly within metal, that if you see heavy metal guitar players or guitar players, and when they sweep pick or do anything in terms of that type of playing, it's very much based on his ideas often. Again, there are other players that were doing the same thing, but Yngwie is really the first point that appears of that type. And then, of course, the 80s was really, again, if you've seen my previous videos where I talked about the 80s, again, excess, flamboyantness, show off and all that. And that continues up until, again, 1991, where everything comes to more or less comes to a stop, because the decade is over, and that type of music, that flamboyant playing and the extravagant guitar solos, basically it became too much. It was simply too much, and music more or less in least in terms of rock and so forth kind of had to reset and be what you can say simplified, or well, it took a different direction with Nirvana and all those bands that came up at that point. But of course, during the 90s, there were still players appearing that showed very virtuosic prominence, like Dimebag Darrell. Of course, Pantera had been around during the 80s, but they were a very different band in the 80s. But in the 90s, it's where Pantera really comes to its own and basically takes over the mantle as the greatest thrash metal band, at least in the 90s, because Metallica had more or less abandoned that moniker. And you have Megadeth, of course. And for me personally, during the 90s, you have Jeff Loomis, of course, appearing with Nevermore, and you have, for me personally, George Bellis, a very niche neoclassic guitar player that appeared in the mid 90s and so forth. It's again, virtuosic guitar players didn't disappear in the 90s. It just shrunk the interest in them. It became a niche thing. But then, and this is where I'll start, when we get to the beginning of the 2000s, for me personally, a new generation of virtuosic or of what I would call the modern guitar player appears, really. for me personally, guitar players that really started that where I thought, okay, we are now getting where we are. We are now in more or less the internet age now, the beginning, or well, the internet's been around at that point for more almost a decade at least in terms of public use. And for me, players that really showed very interesting types of playing were Mattias Eklundh from Free Kitchen, or particularly his solo stuff, his free guitar stuff that he's done along with his, of course, he has his free guitar camp that he has been doing for over 20 years now, I think. That appeared that with his very unique way of playing, he's clearly influenced by a lot of things, Indian music in his latter years, and Frank Zappa and stuff. That was one player I remember in the early 2000s that really I thought, okay, that this is a beginning of a new generation of guitar players. Another one, again, 2005, 6, that really, I think he's the quintessential definition of the modern guitar player, and that is Guthrie Govan, in terms of his type of playing, being a very technical, proficient guitar player, but also a guitar player that is not locked down in terms of the styles he can play. He blew up with his various early YouTube videos, or I think they originally got shared on Facebook or whatever, that showed him playing Larry Carlton style, Robin Ford, and so forth, all these various styles, and being very technically proficient, and this very fluid playing of very heavy use of sliding into notes, bending, pre-bending, all these technical things that he was doing in a very sophisticated manner, but still with a focus on tone and melodic choices and so forth. He's one of the other players was that I also remember, for me at least, was Marcel Coenen, a Dutch guitar player that released an album in 2006 that also was very popular around the time, was Guitar Talk. He was also one of those players that in the early internet age that really, for me personally, he was, because for me personally, he showed me, okay, how sweep picking. I had big problems learning how to sweep pick, and seeing some of his videos, that really helped me finally getting the coordination of sweep picking, that being in sync between your left hand and your right hand. I remember there was one guitar player that really, for me, was eye-opening there, and his record Guitar Talk, which I think he has re-released that about a few years ago. I think last year as a celebration of 25th anniversary of it. That was one. Another one, of course, if we go into the more heavier side of music, is Rusty Cooley. Was also one that really in the mid 2000s really blew everybody's minds because of his insanely fast legato playing and speed picking and everything. He was more or less an extension of Yngwie and Michael Badio and so forth there, with his, I think he released, at that time he had released a couple of songs that came on some of the, not Shrapnel, but they were released on the Guitar 9 websites. They released a couple of albums where his, for some of his songs were on. He had, of course, been around since the 90s, but really there in the mid 2000s, he really, on the internet, gained prominence with his playing, because he was clearly heavily inspired by Holmes, where with his very stretched legato playing and so forth, but with this his insane speed. So those are like the players I remember that really started the modern guitaring. But again, Guthrie Govan being the one is the one that I really think that won out in terms of style, and who later has influenced a lot of guitar players. And of course, now with when we get into the mid 2000s, we get, of course, into the age of social media. We have Facebook now, Twitter, or X as it's called now, appears in 2006, 7. And you have later on Google Plus, which of course is defunct. And again, YouTube appears, of course, Google buying it. And Instagram and all these things start to appear. And those things start to shape, of course, music, how musicians or people discover music. And of course, later on, TikTok appears. But what really happens, I think, is what is the last 10 years, particularly with Instagram and of course on YouTube with shorts that they later appear. But is that you get a generation, you have a generation of guitar players now from the last 10 years. You have Matteo Asato, who's a Brazilian guitar player, who really got his start on, I think, on Instagram with his very short, very beautiful playing of various covers and such. And you have a little bit later the Italian guitar player Matteo Mancuso coming up, also brilliant guitar player, and I'll get back to him a little bit later specifically. But those two, particularly, I want to single out because they are really the latest generation of modern guitar players, where they not Mancuso so much, but Asato, of course, really got his, like I said before, his start as a guitar player that was known for these short pieces that he played on Instagram or on or wherever they were shared. Is that he lived within, made music that had to be fit within 90 seconds or 60 seconds or so, and he has since later told that he got burned out by that. Having to post that regularly simply just ate him up, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, but it sucked everything out of him in the end. And I think that is one of the problems that the modern guitar player has, that in order to become recognized today, you have to use social media. It is I think every musician knows that social media is an essential part of promoting yourself, your talent, your album, or whatever it is. That is a part. And Instagram specifically has sadly, in my opinion, generated what do you call it, where everything has to be perfect. Again, you play the perfect solo or whatever within 60 seconds or 90 seconds or whatever, and it appears like you are this guitar god or whatever. But because and that gives you a 1,000 likes or whatever, depending on your size as a content creator. If you again this idea, now it's content, and now and that's really the problem, is that music in that space is no longer music. It's just content that is being consumed, and in order to for it to grab people's attention, it has to be as extravagant or as perfect as possible. And that's where really the problems I see in the last 10 years have come. And I'm not saying accusing anybody of anything, but you have now other guitar players where you can tell that what they're doing is they're either miming along to something they've recorded, or what they've recorded isn't really played by them, or it is partly played them and it's then edited into perfection, meaning it's snapped to grid, it's quantized, it's all these things. It is this and that to appear like this perfect thing they are doing. And we've seen over the past year, or a little over a year ago, with the Giacomo Turra, which is now a little over a year ago, when he blew up in terms of when it became clear that he first of all was seemingly taking other people's ideas, musical ideas, and then playing them himself and claiming he wrote them, or at least not giving people credit. And then a lot of the stuff he was claiming, he was of course miming along to it because it was so heavily edited or processed that that a lot of the stuff that he played was simply beyond his skill, and that became clear. If you ever seen, I think there are a couple of videos from him at NAMM or something that really shows that he's not that technically proficient as a guitar player as he appears in his Instagram videos. And by that, and he has basically, with that perception on the internet, ended up getting a signature guitar from, I think it was from Giacomo, that when it of course this blew up, that got canceled very quickly, and a lot of other sponsorships and endorsements and so forth, really building himself up to be something he's not. And I think he disappeared for 6 months and then came back, and I don't know what the state of his brand is now, but clearly it was very clear that he's a guitar player now that lives on, that has built up an appearance of being a extremely technical proficient guitar player, but really is only technically proficient in, well, I can edit my way up there with digital tools, meaning DAWs, and whatever else you can do in terms of modern recording techniques. And that's really where I think the problem with the modern guitar player is, that there's a generation, others that I've seen come up over the past few years, that where you can tell that what they post, or you see that solo or whatever they play, and it's technically very impressive what they're doing. But you can also hear, if you listen to some of that stuff, that what they are playing or posting is very heavily edited, that this is not played directly. You are not playing this, you're not just turning your amp on a couple of pedals or using a plugin and just playing something. It is clearly heavily processed. And then when and it's sadly, and initially that gives them a lot of likes and a lot of followers, and then when people start to see, hey, wait a minute, you are miming, or what you are doing is not, you're not really playing this. You may have played some part of it, and then you've taken those parts and then chopped them up into something that you thought sounded cool and then build a song around it or something, and that's fine. I'm not against that. Again, this has been happening for the past 50 years in terms of when songs have been made that editing or doing something can generate the songs, and as a like recording technique is a part of song making also. But what has happened, at least in terms of the modern guitar player, like I mentioned in my opening of this video, is that now there's a small generation of guitar players that have come up now that will say straight to your face, no, I can play that stuff. Okay, here's a guitar, play that right now. And you can quite quickly, when you catch them outside of that Instagram frame, or what you would call it, they cannot play that. They can play something in similar to it, but they cannot play what's actually what you heard in that Instagram video, because it is again either sometimes it's either sped up, or it is so heavily edited that this cannot be done, at least not in the way that it sounds so cleanly again. And you can see there are a couple of YouTube channels that are focused on, of course, catching some of these people that are claiming to be, I can play this stuff perfectly, or showcasing some insane skill, and then if you then start to analyze it a little bit, slow down the video, so then you can see, oh, you are miming, or you are relying on something else to help you sound like that, or whatever. And again, as a recording technique, I wrote this song with the intention I wanted it to sound like that. Again, one of the bands I think of that is that's really on the forefront of this idea of chopping up your melodies and ideas into something is Polyphia, and they're very good at what they do, but they are really also one of those that really started that thing of this highly processed type of music, if you can call it that. At least I'm not the biggest fan of Polyphia. I think they are Scott LePage and Tim Henson are very, very technically gifted guitar players, but as musicians, in terms of what they write of music, again, I'm not the biggest fan of trap music and the electronic music they are inspired by. I think the biggest problem with their music is that, especially Tim Henson, that he stacks just riffs ideas on top of each other, and it's a lot of different styles and techniques that he bunches together, and then there's a underlying beat that he either quantizes to or whatever, and that's cool and everything. But my problem with that stuff is that it is so dense in terms of technical playing and everything that it doesn't breathe. It doesn't sound like music to me. Again, I'm almost 50 now, so you are hearing an old Gen X complaining about this, but really there's no breath. I'll take Yngwie's playing, him just shredding up and down on his 1984 record, Rising Force, any day over that stuff. Same thing with a band like Animals as leaders. They're of course somewhat different, but they again one of those modern bands with their focus on very specific techniques, like what they call selective picking and tapping and all that stuff. and they write similar type riffs that are very dense in that. I think some of their stuff breathes, there's more breath to it. It isn't extended, mostly because it is two guitar players playing 8-string guitars, usually what they use, and then there's no bass player. So it isn't. I think the band would be disastrous if they had a bass player within them that that had to fill out, that had to compete with the bottom end of 2 8 strings. That's one thing. I think there's a positive thing about Animals as leaders, that they don't have a bass player. And this is again, I'm going to go a little bit off topic. One of the problems for me in terms of the heaviest music out there, whether it's death metal, thrash metal, whatever metal type, is that the word heavy has in the past, 20 years, 25 years turned into, but in order to be heavy, you have to play on a 7-string, 8-string guitar. You have to be as low tuned as possible. You have this gent, which of course Animals as leaders comes from, and you have periphery and all that. That when you have so much low end, you have a bass competing with two guitars that are 7 or 8 strings, that you end up with this mess. No matter how well you produce it, it just sounds absolutely fucking terrible to me. It is absolutely junk. And people say, "Oh yeah, that shit, it's heavy." I'll tell you what's heavy. Listening to Into the Void by Black Sabbath, or anything from Sabbath from the 70s area, that's heavy. That's equally as heavy as some of that stuff. It is sad and it is perplexing to me why heavy music has suddenly turned into, in order to sound heavy, you have to tune down to whatever A or whatever you can is in the end. I thought it sounded cool when Eddie did it on the 5150 record on Not Enough, that his E string was tuned to A. That was pretty good. That sounded heavy, but the rest of the track is of course more classic 80s hard rock with just a chunky E string that's tuned to A. And of course now you have also Megadeth, for example. Everything in terms of Megadeth, that's no longer in E, that's in D, but that's mostly of course because Dave Mustaine doesn't have the voice like he used to, so they are tuned down a whole step. And I think even Judas Priest is down a whole step, but like most bands. And it's kind of funny that heavy is now as tuned as low as you can, and that's not what heavy is. Heavy is a feeling. It's not what you would call how low you can tune your strings. Then just use a bass. That will still sound terrible. Because a bass is not a guitar in terms of that. But again, that's a side point of, again, a modern thing that has happened within music. Again, guitar music. But getting back to this idea of bunching up again, this processing, or what is that you, in order to make music, you have to cut it up and everything. That's a choice you make. There are still tons of guitar players out there, of course, that play regularly and everything, but in terms of what Instagram and is that these guitar players have appeared of again heavily editing their performances or their music, and then appearing as if they are not doing that. One other that I've come to think of right now is the Japanese guitar player Ichika Nito, who is an Ibanez endorsee, who is also one who has again started posting on YouTube and in his small, short 60-90 second videos, which are very beautiful compositions in terms of the compositional structure and everything. but you can also tell that these are very heavily edited, processed, and everything. And I think it became very clear. I think when he first time played publicly, which isn't that long ago, I think there's something from NAMM again with him where you can tell that he can not play that stuff. Really, he can play it partly, but not at the speed or precision that it is in his videos. It's again, it is, he composed something which is completely fine, that this is what he composed, and he used different tools to get what he that composition, but again wants to appear like he can play it. And I think that's really what the heart of the one again is, that we have a generation of guitar players, because everything is likes and clicks and everything. And of course, if you've seen my shorts, I'm trying the same thing, but I'm just sitting down during the day when I make a short and just playing something that might be interesting, or I have a funny little idea with a typical Gen X pun or whatever. Again, I'll just play something that I'm inspired by, and like that. I don't do anything processing. I did, just as a fun experiment here a few days ago, make a short showing me playing a 2-string lick very quickly and then speeding it up and asking, when can you tell that this is sped up? I made sure that I pitch corrected, so the pitch of the playing didn't go up. And for me personally, when I listened it back, I went from 100%, meaning normal speed, up to 300%. And just for me, when I hit 175, that's where I felt, okay, this sounds like now, okay, this is sped up. This is not played at that speed by a person. One commenter wrote that he felt like from 200 and upwards from him, then that's when it started to sound like that. And that's really the problem with all those tools you have. It becomes harder and harder, of course, to tell when is this processed and when it's not. So when can people tell? Because we are, and again, in a sea of information with the internet and social media, you're bombarded with a lot of things. And if you never heard anything else in that type, can you even tell when it's fake or it's not really played? And that's where the next step of what I want to talk about is, of course, of now with AI music. And if you've been on the internet, within guitar, at least, of course, you had here now the controversy with the Dario releasing a video showcasing their latest set of strings for, I think they were made a showcase of a new type of string set for 8 or 9 strings. So that, and the music they played in it, it was rather clear that either was in heavily processed, or what it turns out seemingly to be now is that it is made with Suno, which is an AI program that can make music, where you just type in a prompt like ChatGPT or whatever you use, and it spits out something. And that thing became a debacle because the Dario denied it, and then sadly the internet went what the Dutch goes the internet way, and of course Dutch's investigation, which is fine, but again you have idiots that very quickly now we are going to send out death threats to the artists and this and that, and again that's one other problem with again being someone who has lived a life long before the internet, is that the hubris of people today, it is for some reason become very easy to write another person a death threat in this age for some reason. It's one thing to say calling somebody a slur or or ad hominem or whatever. But this wishing death to someone because they made a company made a what you would call a deceptive ad. Well, that's really something else. I made a little short also, just as a fun thing, showcasing what I think personally the diary should focus on in the next ad, with a little funny pun at the end. And I will say this: as long as the diary makes great strings as they have the last 30 years, which I have been using them exclusively, they'll still get my business. The day they start making crappy strings, that's something else. And I'll stand by that. In the last 30 years, I've used, when I started playing guitar, again, going off topic, I bought whatever cheapest strings I could get from my local guitar store in town. And then once in a while I would buy the Dario because they were actually the next cheapest thing. But then I remember when I think I've had begun going to university, and at the local bookstore, at the University U bookstore, they had one or two guitar magazines. I think they had Guitar Player, and I can't remember what it was, a Guitar World, what it was called back then also. And I was flipping through it, and there was an ad by Steve Vai for strings, and it was from Dean Markley. And the sales pitch was for those strings was that these were cryogenically altered, meaning that they didn't need to be pre-stretched as much before. It was something in that time. So I thought, and that was the only time I've ever been really tempted to buy something from an ad in terms of guitar things. So I thought, you know what, the next time I buy things, I'm gonna try those. And I remember I went into my local guitar store and I saw they had them. I can't remember if I asked or I saw them, and they had, and I said, okay, I'd like a pack of those strings. I bought a pack of those Dean Markley strings, went home, put them on, regular 6-string set, 9 to 42. 4 of those 6 strings broke when I put them on. They cracked, they popped when I started to put tension on them. It was the worst piece of crap I've ever touched. The worst musical product I ever touched, those Dean Markley strings. And I said to myself, I'm never touching that crap again. And since then, I've used the Dario. The only other time in the past, I think in 2022 or 2023, I just had bought strings, a whole set of strings, because I buy in bunch when I need them, and I put them on, and I didn't think about it, put them on, and when I was tuning up, I had tuned up, stretched the strings, and it was playing, and then for some reason the high E string broke. I thought, oh crap. That was the first time that ever happened with, and there was standard the Dario said. And I didn't want to order because I usually buy online. So I went there was a new guitar store in town. So I thought I'd go in and just buy a pack when I'm next time in town. So I went in and they didn't have the Dario. And they had Ernie Ball. So I bought a set of Ernie Ball Slinkies, 9 to 42. And they were great. Tried that thing. But that's the only other time ever in the past 30 years I have not used the Dario. Everything has been the Dario for me, and it's going to continue being that. But again, that's again off topic. Getting back to the modern guitar player, and as I was saying, now with AI coming in, and being this new tool for in terms of writing songs, playing instruments and everything, where does the guitar player go from here? Is there any incentive at the end of the day to learn to play guitar and become or just become proficient in the guitar, playing all this? Because of course those AI programs will of course become better and better. They are not going away. They are already now being used in some sort of way to help musicians who have to write music for a living, or session players and need ideas. Again, it's a tool in some ways, this, but I think it is, we are now in a very pivotal point for guitar or any instrument. Is where is the what is the why learn an instrument? Why be good at the guitar? Why be good at bass? Why be good at anything when you can just type in a few words? Again, these AI companies sell themselves as, or we are just trying to democratize songwriting or music making as a general. I can't remember who it was that said, I think it was one of those AI tech bros, as you can call them, saying that nobody liked to have to learn songs, something like that. I'm paraphrasing, of course, and it's like, that's the whole point. It is again learning these things and being able to play these things. There is that challenge. There's solving, you can say, that puzzle, so to speak, that, oh, I can play this song now, or I can play together with people after spending time playing to records and something like that. That is the whole point of it. It is again, the point of music is, at least to me, and I hope to you, dear viewer, is it is a way for to tell stories. It is a way for connecting with other human beings. That saying, well, you can just let a machine do it. But at the end of the day, writing a song with AI, it's one thing. Okay, you type in something and say, give me music in that, or how well you describe it. The pool of information or knowledge it's taking from isn't from you. It is taking from a collective pool of whatever it has collected or has been trained on. It's not you even. That's the one thing when you write a song yourself, whatever it is, that what comes out of you, how well you are in tune with your instrument and your senses, what you hear in your mind, how well you can extract that, and even more the limitations you have. That's really what it comes down to, your limitations. And that's, again, going back to limitations. I've talked earlier about with Polyphia that I don't think Polyphia is very good songwriters, because again, their music doesn't breathe. And that's really, again, with modern guitar players, again, that I didn't mention this earlier. I think in the past 10 years, there has been a rise again in this chase of technical proficiency, like we saw in the 80s, again, upstaging each other in terms of being the best at doing this and that and outperforming each other. And then now we have this, you have all those tools that you can program your way out of it, or you can cut your performance up to its pitch perfect and you can play it at any speed, and nobody will really be able to tell it whether you played it at half speed or double speed or whatever. Again, it because again, playing something, sometimes if it's actually more important the pauses you make between the things you play and not so much what you play, is that the room you give the melody or the riff or whatever you give it to breathe. Sometimes that is much more important than the riff itself. It's sometimes the space, the quietness that comes after that really says something. Because again, what partly prompted me to make this video really was that over the weekend I saw a post on X where somebody had posted a clip by Matteo Mancuso, which was from JTC, which is a site that offers lessons from various guitar players. And usually these lessons or these things that they offer are people playing songs that often are very technical, and then they these songs are usually written to showcase a certain technique or a certain style of play. So they are usually very virtuosic in nature, because that's really what JTC sells themselves on. And they have a bunch of guitar players. And Guthrie Govan started there, was one of the first, and others. But he has Mancuso has a track there now, or a course, I think they call it. And somebody posted a clip from that, and it showcases his type of playing, that very beautiful, very fluid again. But the way specifically that performance is that he plays some very fast arpeggios, and then there's some short pause, short phrases that are slow, and then it goes back and forth. And I can understand and I saw tons of negative comments that they think this is absolute dog, pardon my French, dog shit. And so and I can partly see why people would see that, because again, it is just this back and forth with this of this very fast playing. And Mancuso is of course very technical, because he plays again with 2 or 3 fingers. He doesn't use a pick, so already that is very impressive. But it's just this back and forth with slow, very slow phrase, then a fast patches of notes of either legato or staccato playing or whatever, or tapping or whatever. And again, when you see that and it goes back and forth and it continues and continues, it gets the same feeling that there's no space, there's no breath, and that's really where I think a lot of, when we go take out all the people that are doing edited playing, meaning that they do a lot of cutting up their performances and then building whatever they want on it. But that's really the other modern guitar player now, is this very beautiful playing with a lot of feeling and technique, but again, slow playing, and then followed by some very fast runs of whatever, arpeggios or whatever you think, and back forth, and you still get that problem. There is no room for breathing here. Some players can do that, but a lot of things, because again, it ends up again, what are you trying to achieve here? Are you making a song where you are trying to convey some emotion, or are you just conveying technique in the end? And that's really the other part where I personally think modern guitar playing has gone, sadly. Again, this technical proficiency comes before emotion and feel, and like that. Again, a guitar player I remember This is a guitar player that goes back again. This is 20 years. I should have mentioned him when I was talking about Rusty Cooley. Rusty Cooley, biggest critique of him in the beginning was that again he just does those fast, insane legato runs that seeming a lot of people back then accused him of speeding up his clips and so forth. But there was one other guy from Italy that appeared called Francesco Fareri, I think he was called. He came out 2006, 7, and he was even faster than in terms of his playing than Rusty Cooley. But he had a glaring problem with his playing. He had only claimed was that at the time that he appeared, and he ended up making a few songs, I can't remember, with Vitali Kruprich even back then. And I think you can find his YouTube channel. He is on YouTube, I think. But back then, one glaring problem with his playing is that he could play all those arpeggios and everything, and it sounded great and everything, and he was super fast and everything. But the minute he stopped and he just tried to vibrate a string, it was like pulling a cat's tail. It was absolutely dreadful. He had no control over it. But in his defense, he had focused all of his playing, learning on exactly that. That was his goal, getting to that. He wanted that. So that was it isn't bad, but it's clearly very limited what he has learned because he was so focused on it like that. So that's kind of interesting also that there are some again, when you learn guitar, you learn, of course, based on your interest. And again, and sometimes you end up in terms of, well, I can play this and this and this because this is interests me. I remember hearing Steve Vai saying in an interview or a masterclass where he says, I focus on my strengths. I don't focus on my weaknesses. And that's kind of like what I think he did. He focused very on his strength and his will to say, I want to be able to do that. And I'm going to focus all my time on that. And hence, he ends up with having some, let's say, rather glaring deficiencies in his playing, meaning why they having a decent vibrato, he basically didn't have any. These what I remember hearing there. But again, getting back to more recent times, is that I think we are in a place in terms of guitar playing. Maybe it's because again, a lot of the modern guitar players I see again through social media and the internet in general, that I may be way off, but again, it is technical proficiency seems to have taken over the guitar world again, and then now we are fighting whether or not the technical proficiency that some players display, can they even do it? Are we looking at something that's edited to hell, or are we looking at someone who's genuine, can play this? And we've, like I mentioned, if you've seen several players now that where it's questionable what they can do or can't do. But it's and that's simply because again everyone is chasing likes, subscribers, and so forth, or at worst getting endorsement deals or whatever. That's really the next step, of course, when people present something, is that where is this financial incentive again, and this is of course again the thing with YouTube and social media in general, is that okay, you start just posting on the internet, and then all of a sudden it suddenly becomes profitable, or you have a chance to make a living at it. That changes often things, because again, are you going to post something that's not going to generate income for you? And then it becomes again a question of, I would say, ethics, whether or not you can stay honest with yourself and your audience that you have attracted. Because I will remind, I said this in a recent video, you don't own your audience. You attract what you can. It is not your audience, really. You don't own the audience, and vice versa. The audience doesn't own you either. That's also an important thing, is that you attract what you can with whatever people find appealing. And that is, again, if you can watch my video on artists and activism, where I talk about this, is that be careful in what you are trying to sell your audience, really, because that can go sideways very quickly. And I think that, again, I'm way off topic now, but again, I think it's important, is that again, this lecturing your audience and so forth is a very, very dangerous thing to do, because you don't know your audience. You don't know who sits on the other end of that camera you're recording on. In the end, you have 50 pardon my friends, 50 fucking layers of assumptions to that, what you claim is your audience, and vice versa, is that don't become captured by the audience, meaning you don't dare say certain things because the audience expects something from you. That's also very, very dangerous. There's a middle ground people have to find, and that's different from artist to artist in the end. So again, coming back to what's next for the guitar player, like I mentioned, where does the modern guitar player go from here? Because you have access to all the tones in the world through plugins and whatever. You can sound like whoever you want. You can find this and that and all that, and you can learn every technique in the world if you have the skill for it. Again, even if and then again, even if you have the skill, don't have the skill, you can make it appear you have the skill. And the question is, when will we reach a stage where people cannot suss it out that the guy who's playing those amazing licks isn't playing anything, or he isn't there? Because again, we are not talking about even people anymore. We are talking about, again, this is the next step again, but we've seen there was again on Instagram or whatever, again, people posting people playing stuff where that sounded very, very beautiful, and it was of course AI generated, but nobody could really tell until they started looking, and then okay, that's not a real person either, that's AI everything. So where is the next stage for the modern guitar player, if we are talking humans and the skill of playing guitar? And that is of course playing live, playing in front of people. And I'm not talking about playing in front of 20,000 people, because even there, we know when you play in front of 20,000 people, a lot of stuff is automated, this and that, because you have to run a show and all the lights and everything. So there are backing tracks and everything in order to make it work, depending again, size of the artist and whatever. That the next stage for music in general and guitar players is again more intimate venues where people can experience humans playing for other humans and connecting and conveying whatever you want through your music in a very organic manner. That's really where I think I think I could be wrong. I do think maybe whether we are gonna get a reset of the guitar or guitar music again, that all this technical proficiency takes a back seat at some point again, and it comes down to more basic terms. Again, I'm not saying that all this technical guitar playing is as popular as it was in the 80s. It isn't. If you look at the charts in general, there is no of that type of music. It is just a subculture I'm talking about in the end, but it has grown in these in the last 20 years compared to what the size it was in the 2000s. But again, I could also be wrong again, because in the 2000s we didn't have all those social media sites as we do now, so that might skew everything. It's hard to say how much this actually weighs again. But then of course there again there is interest in rock music and hard rock and heavy metal music again. Megadeth's last record debuted at #1 in the US on the Billboard charts. Again, not with the sales number like they had in the early 90s, but still. So there is still interest in this stuff there, in that type of music. So how to wrap this up? I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I do think it is for someone who plays music that is reliant on heavy processing, and you're composing riffs that you cut up and do this and that with. I think it's better to be honest with the audience what you are doing, instead of pretending like I'm playing this. That's just me. You are not doing yourself any favors by pretending, no, I'm playing that. I'm not faking that or anything. That stuff needs to be scrutinized, of course, because it's not good. You are giving people who may want to start playing guitar an extremely unrealistic goal to achieve. Whereas you say, well, in order to become somewhat proficient, of course, it's going to take years. I know myself, getting to what I've been able to do, again, someone who's just been sitting at home for the past 30 plus years playing guitar, it takes time and effort. And that's why when I always see those courses or those YouTube videos saying, 10 minutes every day, and within 30 days, you are this much better at this. And that's not true. You might be marginally better at something because you focus on some specific technique or whatever. But you are not suddenly twice as fast on guitars all of a sudden by doing exercise. It just takes years. There are maybe some small subset of people that can do something like that, but that has more to do with genetics and something that they are able to learn mechanical things very quickly. That's of course a plus if you are one of those people. But for most people, it takes years to get to a point where you can do certain technical things on the guitar. Now, only talking guitar that require technical proficiency, so that it can be performed in a, what do you call it, in a decent manner. Again, it is again. Uh, at the end of the day, what you want to achieve on the guitar is, of course, a very personal thing. And if you want to play like, say, Kurt Cobain and something like that, well, the playing itself of things that Kurt Cobain wrote, that may not, by most people who play guitar, saying, oh, well, that's not that difficult. But again, learning to write like him, that there will never be another Kurt Cobain. Again, it is it is one thing to be able to convey what you have in you, the music you have in you, and even do you even have music inside of you that people can resonate with you? That is not something you control. You put something out, whatever it is, and it may resonate with you. That is at least how back in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 70s, where you put out records and then it resonated with people, and people were willing to take a chance on you. Record companies are not like that anymore. They haven't been for the past 25 years, 30 years. Even in the 80s, they were trying to figure out, how can I copy this hit, and then like that. Where in the 60s and 70s, and there's an old interview with Frank Zappa where he talked about it. That back in the day, the record companies, at least the A&R people, that would say, hey, I don't, or the CEO or whatever of these companies said, hey, I don't understand the music, but I'm willing to take a chance on it because there may be some interest on it. Nowadays, there's no interest in that. Because they don't have budgets for this stuff. It is very cut and dry, these things there. But again, with the internet and with social media, artists today have the closest potential connection to an audience like they never had before. But it is also one of the hardest things for people for getting them to listen to your stuff, because again, you are a speck in a sea of other artists, people, or whatever that take up the time of people's attention. So it's hard, and getting people to click, giving you a like, clicking on a link, it is the hardest thing, even though it is so simple, but that's how it is, and you have to live with that. And hopefully what you present to the audience is in itself enough of an incentive for them to do that. So you don't have to do the work. That this comes naturally, and that's my 2 cents. I think I've rambled long enough here. So this is my, I don't know how long this is now, rant about the modern guitar player and the modern state of guitar music. And that's that. If you stayed around to this point, I thank you very much. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.